Jon Meacham, talk about what was lost yesterday. Talk about where you feel we are. We saw Ezra Klein's list of partial list of all the attacks over the past few years. And those attacks didn't even include the attempted arson of Governor Shapiro's home while his family slept inside of it, or the assassination of two young Jewish workers at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., the firebombing in Colorado of people who were marching peacefully for the hostages being held by Hamas. It is political violence feeding on political violence. And as Willie said, most political figures, all living U.S. presidents, condemning this in the strongest terms and saying we must rise above it. But some people, obviously on social media, but also on television, suggesting retribution and a call to arms. It's deeply concerning right now, John. I would guess for you especially, seeing that this happened on a college campus where students were invited to have a vigorous debate and discussion in the free marketplace of ideas. And that was cut short yesterday. What are the impacts of this tragedy?
Well, one of the points of America is that we're supposed to fight with words and not weapons, right? That was one of the reasons for this experiment. And words are vital. Words have consequences. We've talked about that endlessly. But this is a violation. The murder of Charlie Kirk is a violation of a fundamental American covenant, which is that we are citizens under law. We are seeking a more perfect union. We can disagree about the means of politics, but we shouldn't disagree about the ends. The end being that we come to a certain public conclusion for a certain period of time, then we debate it all again. We adjudicate it all again. There's never been a once upon a time in American history, and there's not going to be a happily ever after. One of the things I think we have to think about, and I would urge people as they try to get their own orientation here, is what of other periods of ferocious division in the country? We've always been divided, but there are degrees of that. But of ferocious division that have led to violence, a proliferation of this kind of violence, and what are periods of division that have not taken this tragic toll that we saw yesterday. You think about Arthur Schlesinger, the historian, used to talk about how the battle over intervention in 1939, 1940, and 1941 was as ferocious as the debates over Vietnam. We don't associate the early World War II era with great incidents of political violence. We do, of course, in the 1960s. The other incredibly important period and point to remember here is that so much of the violence in our native region, Joe, in the 1950s, in the 1960s, was about a fundamental disagreement over what America meant. The murder of Emmett Till. In many ways, the assassination of Medgar Evers in 1963, on the same night that John Kennedy gave his civil rights speech, on the same day that George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door. Medgar Evers is assassinated, the field secretary of the NAACP, in his driveway in Jackson, Mississippi. And that was in large part because the country could not find a common vernacular, that we did not seem to share a fundamental value, which was recognizing the inherent dignity of everyone else. And I fear that that is in fact where we are now, that there is not a common recognition that we are all standing before the Constitution, and if you're inclined this way, before God, as an equal person. And if that is lost, it is immensely difficult to get back. The good news is that every one of us can help this situation today. Ordinarily, if you will, this would be a moment where someone like me would say, well, people with a microphone need to be very, very careful about what they say. That's absolutely true. But we live in a world where every single person has the same access, presumably, to the ears of millions that Walter Cronkite had, right? Every one of us is a force in the Republic because of the nature of technology. So I would just urge everybody, and I tell myself this all the time, and sometimes I listen to myself, not always, but I try. Let's take a deep breath before we throw that punch, before you post the snarky opinion, before you rush to judgment. Just take a minute and let's try to make the climate one in which we disagree without horrible tragedy like we saw yesterday.
Vaughn, you described that scene on the plane yesterday with Secretary Kennedy, Attorney General Bondi. I spoke to those in the White House. Shell-shocked people, lower press, others, tears in their eyes, watching the television screens as the news, watching their phones as they were seeing the horrible video of Charlie Kirk's assassination. The president himself watching TV, calling aides for updates. Talk to us about what might be next. We just received word that the vice president, who was scheduled to come to New York today for September 11th remembrances, is now going to Utah to spend time with the family of Charlie Kirk. He, of course, very close with Kirk. The president alluded to some next steps in his remarks last night, a video that was released to the nation. Talk to us what we should expect to hear from the president in the White House today.
Right. On the point of J.D. Vance, I think that their relationship is important for people to understand that these two, before J.D. Vance ever ran for office, became very close. J.D. Vance credited Charlie Kirk with help urging him to run for the Senate. I was there in the closing days of what was a competitive Ohio Senate primary back in May of 2022 that Vance narrowly won, and it was Kirk that was there on the campaign trail with him in those closing days. And the night that he won, he credited Kirk for helping him put him across the finish line. There was no really other federal officials, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, but there was little other support, and Charlie Kirk was very important there to his candidacy, and that is where we see now that J.D. Vance, along with Second Lady Usha Vance, are going to be heading to Salt Lake City to pay their respects to the family there in Utah. The president, on his part, is heading up to New York today for 9/11 ceremonies. He's also going to be going to the Yankees game tonight. Undoubtedly, this will bring much of, on the Republican side at least, much of this week's, I guess, work, if you will, to a halt, understanding the sensitivities and the difficulty that so many are going through. In terms of where this goes, I think that the president, in his 4-minute video that he posted last night, he called out the left very, very explicitly and said that those, he mentioned the media, that those that helped effectively promote rhetoric around the idea that individuals on the right are fascist should be sought out after and should be held to account. I think that this is one where we saw after his assassination attempt last year, there was a momentary call for the country to come together and for more civil discourse. We have seen over the last year really anything but that play out. I think that the president, it is worth noting that this summer, in the aftermath of the assassination of Melissa Hortman, we did not hear the president comment on her killing. And this is also a president that mocked the beatings of Paul Pelosi. And so I think that there's a lot of questions here for the White House of what does this look like going forward. A close friend, somebody assassinated. The difficulties are monumental here and difficult. And I think that, to John's point, there's a deep question here of how does this country move forward? And if I may add to John's point, it takes me back to the John McCain quote that he wrote in his letter in August 2017 upon his passing to the country, in which he said, "But we have always had so much more in common with each other than in disagreement. And if only we remember that and give each other the benefit of the presumption that we all love our country, we will get through these challenging times." Senator John McCain. I question to what extent we believe in that in our neighbors, in the extent to which we believe that each other loves the country just as the same as their fellow neighbor. And I think that that is a question for both political parties up on Capitol Hill and at the White House and across the country.
MSNBC senior White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, thank you for your reporting. Historian John Meacham, thank you as well. And still ahead on Morning Joe, we're going to get a live report from Orem, Utah, where Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. NBC's Morgan Chesky joins